It is ascendant 29 degrees of Leo, and the midheaven on Algol with Mercury conjuncting the midheaven, Jupiter day, and Mercury hour with both Jupiter and Mercury being in Venus sign, with Venus in 2 degrees Leo tropically. So Venus is just separating from the opposition with Pluto. The moon is in the seventh house, 14 degrees, in between Mars and in between opposing Mars and Lilith, and in between Pluto and Saturn. Okay, Saturn in 7 degrees Pisces. Um, so the ruler of the day is in 4 degrees Taurus on the natal Venus of the speaker, which is me. And the ruler of the hour is in 25 degrees Taurus, conjuncting or applying to conjunct Algol. The ruler of both the day and the hour is Venus and is in Leo. So I kind of began to watch, and I encourage you to watch Krasi's video about Venus invisibility in sidereal Cancer, which is tropical Leo, and her rising, so will be retrograde and invisible. And my video is more a bit of a wider arc than that video, as I have noticed Venus has been with Ketu when the eclipses were on the Taurus and Scorpio axis. So both Venus and Mars are going through something, and and she will be around Ketu after her rising. Okay, well, Mars will be around Ketu in one of the eclipses. So I have talked about Mars kind of going through a certain transformation. Okay, Mars is doing Mars journey, but also Venus is continuing to go through a deep transformation. And who is with Rahu? Who is going to be with Rahu when we have Mars and then Venus, or Venus and then Mars, with Ketu, when Ketu is approaching Libra? And then we're going to have Ketu on Venus sign, so we're going to have Ketu with Libra, and Ketu is what we lean back to, but also what we are purging, what we are letting go of. Okay, so let's say in a natal chart, let's take a look at this chart. This chart has a Ketu in the 3rd house and Rahu in the 9th house. Okay, and so this chart, basically, if it was a native person, it goes through a journey of tending to lean back on the close environment and the group of close friends, and the elementary skill-based education, communication, applied stuff. And as they grow older, they venture in to traveling, to communicating with the world, to higher studies, to deep philosophies of life, to the deep religion behind that day-to-day communication, and learning to integrate that Ketu and Rahu. And so when we have an eclipse cycle, whatever is with Ketu is what we are tending to lean back on, but we have to let go. Okay? So when Ketu was, now it is in Mars sign, so those things that we thought we could lean on, that are of the Martian, it can be the intelligence, okay? Secret societies, secret communities, psychological forms of empowerment. We tend to lean back to them, but we had to let go of them. And yet we had Venus with Ketu on that cycle as well. Okay, we had the eclipses with Venus with Ketu in a Mars sign. So fallen Venus. Now we're heading to Ketu in Venus sign. And I've talked about us in a process of a beginning of 9 years that has a stepping stone of purging diplomacy. Okay? That being said, Mars is going to be with that Ketu. So the way I look at Venus going retrograde and invisible in tropical Leo is a part of the cycle, of the process that is going through both Venus and Mars. So yes, Venus will be retrograde in Leo. And then Ketu is going to come to Leo. And Venus will also be invisible. What is invisibility meaning? So we talk about Kazimi as a very good point for a planet to be in because they are getting the light of the sun. Okay, it's like a program receiving an upgrade. Okay, and I addressed that when I talked about Venus being in Libra during the last cycle. So you can go there. And however, invisibility from our vantage point in Earth, it means that the planet is hidden in the rays of the sun, which means during the process of that upgrade, okay, there's a process. And during the process of invisibility, when it's not Kazimi, but it is invisible, we can't see it from Earth, it means simply we don't have as much connection, protection, light. We don't have the light of this planet on our Earth. So if you're sleeping outside, and those are personal planets, you can see Venus. So I believe she's going invisible as an evening star and then rises as a morning star. So you can listen to Krasi for more details. So she's definitely, and she's going to see Cancer because she does sidereal astrology. So, and I'm speaking about this in tropical terms. What we're going to see is that while the Venus is receiving the light of the sun, so she's going through an upgrade, it's kind of like she retreats. And so all things Venusian do not receive the light of Venus. Should you work magically with Venus more or less in this time? I don't know. But definitely on a mundane level, that is with before magical intervention, on a mundane level, and this is important because when I say, for example, now Mercury is with Algol, okay, before magical intervention, we can have exposure, or we can have tragedies related to children, to judges, to traders. We can have a market collapse. I haven't watched the news, so I wouldn't know how to tell you. With medical intervention, we can have protection, seeing to the essence of and healing, protecting of the voices who speak up in favor of, blah, 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 and all that, because then when you turn to Algol, and you meet the planet. When you turn to a planet, you meet the planet halfway, and so you're a part of what they're trying to do. You're a part of the solution rather than being a part of the problem. This is what essentially magic does, in my point of view, or in my experience, my humble experience. So before medical, like when I speak mundane, okay, not all people are turning to the planets. So mundanely, think about what happens when the teacher is not in class. Okay, so Venus, the teacher, she's going to have a conversation outside of class. What happens in class? Okay. In regarding to Venus. So what is Venus? It's our voices, it's our values, it's our jewelries, it's our clothes, it's our, you think textile or fabric, it's our senses, the sensual experience, it's our, to some facets of safety in the body, fertility, the type of fertility that is conception with pleasure, okay, the pleasures of life, all of those when the teacher is not in class, there's nobody guarding that in a way that is invisible. Krasi addresses invisible stars as a very spiritual, so you might want to turn to Venus on a very spiritual level, very philosophical level. You may have philosophical insight when Venus is invisible, and especially with the retrograde. So you may, if I get her correctly, you may think about the Venusian in a way that's more philosophical, the philosophy of beauty, the philosophy of aesthetics, the essence and form, so the essential part of form, all these things. But it perhaps is less the time to expect an increase in income thanks to being a model. Okay, maybe yes, maybe no. But those are one of the things that are receiving an upgrade. So those upgrades are necessary because as the spirit of the times changes, we need the values and we need things to be updated, and we need to understand all values in new ways, or we need to let go of certain old values. One example that I love to give in this context is the example of suicide. So there's a book, I don't know how it's called in English, it's called Hael Aprei. And in that book, there is missings of suicide and the concept of suicide and so on and so forth. So trigger warning there. And one of the tales is that at a certain time in Christianity, there were types of people, there were groups of Christians that would believe that the afterlife is so much more important than this life, that they were so eager to die that they would threaten a person. They would take a person, threaten them that they will kill this person if this person doesn't kill them. Okay? And so at that time, there was an emphasis on the prohibition of suicide, because to that time, suicide was indeed a terrible thing to do. Or the person who would commit suicide, it would be a person that would threaten another person to kill them because they, in the name of God. So it was important from the church to bring here a very strong voice that this is not a representation of God, and the sanctity of life is important, and this world matters at least as the world above, or this, even if the world beyond is so important, there is importance in being here in this life, and we need to not take this life for granted and not do things to kill ourselves so that we can get to the other side. Now you take that perhaps a couple of years, perhaps a couple of centuries forward, and then you get situations where people do not want to die, they want to live, and they seem to see, or their experience is that life is taken from them so much so that they don't see a way to live. And so trying to kill themselves is actually honoring the sanctity of life by respecting dignity. Okay, because God gave us life with dignity, and so we are divine being, we're dignified being, and so when the dignity is taken, then there can be desire to end life, and because you want to be in a position of dignity. Okay, if your dignity is taken away from you, then that can be an experience where the act of suicide is not an abomination, but actually honoring the divine. And so the different context of a different belief. So you think about a planet in the light of the sun, or a planet in visibility, as a planet of going from a certain perception of what is true and what is good to a certain other perception. Okay, so the people who are messianic in the times where they would threaten a person, they would cause a person to commit murder because they wanted to, and they would threaten their lives because they wanted to go to the afterlife. So those people, yes, they needed to be held accountable, they needed to change. But if you think about the person that is just trying to hold on to their dignity, and to hold on to the sanctity of life, because they feel that their life is being violated, the divine in them is being violated, and so they don't want to be a harming person, and they just want to end the suffering. it is society that needs to change. Now it's not the people that need to change, it's the people who take the dignity and the life out of a person, that they need to be held accountable and they need to change. Okay, so a planet going through the invisibility stage or towards the Kazimi is a planet receiving this upgrade. Both Mars and Venus were receiving upgrade and will be receiving upgrade in the coming basically 9 years, but it kind of begins, it already began when we had the eclipse involved with Eris in Aries. And this is why I named this video Venus is making place for Eris. So on the asteroid on Eris, I have a fascinating interview coming up, if the gods of communication desire about Eris from a person who's very experienced with the archetype of Eris. Other than that, think about Eris, the symbol of Eris. And so, of course, I want to show you this symbol of Eris. That is with Rahu. Okay? So we have all these nice things, but you know that I'm already referring to this. So we have something that reminds us of both the Mars and the Venus. Okay, it looks like a Venus, but it has a Marsy thing pointed downward. And so a lot of people associate Eris with being transgender. Okay, the woman with the penis. Or the man that appears feminine. And so the categories of masculine and feminine that we have been holding on to for our medications, okay, traditional Chinese medicine, Indian medicine, and I mean not just Ayurveda. I think in Hinduism they had it more balanced, but I'm not sure. I'm talking also about Native American shamanism, which of course is a grand term, but each one of these societies is grand. There's no one Chinese medicine, definitely not one Ayurveda, and definitely not one Indian shamanic medicine. But on a larger scope, the beyond sexism, okay, so even in the place where people did not mean it in a sexist, in a repressive way, the categories of feminine, masculine, yin, yang, Shakti, Shiva, or whichever cultural version you have of this, are ancient. And we were used to think about these categories as polarities within which we operate like fractals. Okay, so if our hand is yin, then our fingers are yang, and so on and so forth. But with Aries, there is something around these categories that doesn't coincide. It's beyond the mercurial. Okay, mercurial is a play within polarity, between polarities and within polarities. Okay, it's a cancellation of polarities that stems from polarities. This is mathematical, fractal, interesting, lovely thing. And that's beautiful and that's honoring. With Eris, something else is going on here. Okay, there's already the notion of being outcast or ostracized and the reaction to that. Okay, Victor from Victor Astro associates Eris, the shade of Eris, to also narcissistic. And when you think about narcissistic people, what we call narcissistic people, the essence of the upbringing is basically the person was brought into a situation where they either were asked to be like a partner or like an erotic, and it doesn't necessarily mean pedophilia, or like an erotic object to their parents. So they were glorified, but underneath this glorification lied something that deprived and this was not done consciously. Okay, we're talking about people that grew between wars, after wars. There was a lot of conflict going on. So people did not have a partner. People did not. There were all kinds of needs, erotic and whatnot, that were not being met. And so even though nobody wanted necessarily to hurt anybody, there were all these situations where there was an undertone of something that deprived the child of its childhood, that glorified a person to the point that they felt the void within, and then the behaviors became narcissistic. And so Eris can represent that. It's okay, it's in its shade. And then another thing that Victor said, and I totally relate to, is that Eris is also genuinely about being a victim of corruption, um, and and the response to being a victim of corruption. Okay, so it's all these archetypes. Now we have to understand, since we discovered Eris till today, she had been in Aries sign. So we don't, in our times, we have not experienced Aries in a different sign. And so a lot of what I'm going to say are going to be around the great I am. Okay, we talk about narcissism. So this is the I am, or the shade of the I am. Okay, I am a nobody but me, which literally stems from the lack of existence, in essence. So people who have experienced what people call narcissistic abuse, or simply gaslighting, and all these disorganized attachment styles and whatnot, or relational trauma or whatnot. Um, so we can't really separate or differentiate Aries the sign with Aries the archetype. Aries in Aries, and I can only say Aries in Aries because I haven't seen Aries in Taurus, I haven't seen Aries in Pisces, okay? Plays around the archetypes of who am I? Am I a man? Am I a woman? What is this category? And playing with this category. But unlike Mercury, which can be innocent, Aries is doing so with a condensed energy or a trauma attached, not necessarily to the nature of Eris herself, but with what she is exposing. And in a way, she is compared to Pluto, and for a very good reason, because Pluto decomposes everything that it's in, and Eris is kind of doing the same. Pluto is the compost, okay? And Eris is kind of playing with the archetype. She flips things over. So it's kind of like a mercurial attitude, but you have to understand that I'm speaking with Eris currently conjuncting my Mercury. So I could be mixing Eris with Mercury, with Aries, and so on and so forth. And yet I will bring a person who experienced the archetype of Eris. And the way, or the way this vessel being me brings this archetype about is basically being the Gedel point, or the Gedel organ of every group. That is kind of like the outcast. Okay, if mathematics was social sciences, you would say the outcast of society that is needed for the preservance of the truth value one, okay, of the validity of society. You think about the image of the fool, the clown, and again, those are very mercurial. Or the person that is the outcast, and how important it is to give a place to the outcast, because this outcast is actually bringing us validation. If there is an outcast and they're being treated with respect, think about the town's fool again, that the special place that clowns and fools were given in certain cultures, both Western and Eastern. Okay, think about Hioka. So people say cultural appropriation, blah, 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 or at least possibilianism. And the fact that there was a place for that outcast, there was given a place for this outcast to be. Okay, that gave validation to society, because society's value is tested on how we treat our outcasts. And as Pluto is approaching, or is already, is ingressing back to Capricorn, is approaching the for good. They call S.J. I think S.J. Anderson for the for good term of ingressing into Aquarius. this is a time where if the power is to the masses or the power is to the people en masse, how do the people en masse treat the marginalized society? And so we have this Eris in Eris squaring this Pluto. Okay, there's this tension relation, and like I said, the trine is even more potent. And I think Dan Waite's, you're gonna watch Dan Waite's video about the relations between Eris and Pluto in mundane level. Okay, one lovely line he said, it sometimes Eris trine Pluto simply means two very mundanely vicious or seemingly vicious forces just being agreeing with each other. Okay, so you can think about an agreement between Stalin and Hitler before it was revoked. Okay, and but then also the betrayal of this agreement. You know, it is all things, because what Pluto and Eris have in common is that they are both that which was repressed or taboo, Pluto, and that which was ostracized as Eris. And the process, if we want to understand what is happening with the Venusian, one good way is to think in large. Okay, Venusian, what would you connect the Venusian? You would say, oh, feminism. Okay, so the right of women, so and so. But what happens when you have cisgender women claiming that transgender women are masquerading a hormonal crime against women, or whatever you want to call it? Okay, what happens then? While the essence of what feminism was fighting about is abuse of power and violence. Back then it was, of course, towards women, but of course this stems from, if we interfere in this equation, we understand that the man who has a couple of wives and was stressed or pressured to have a couple of wives by society is actually operating by a prophet who wanted to say that the disabled woman, the widow, the virgin woman, and I don't remember what was it. Oh, perhaps the stranger woman or the refugee woman, they can all be wed, which was not the case in Christianity and in Judaism. Okay, and so he married 4 wives to show that all of these women can be wed. And then it's been taken to a point where men are being pressured to rape 4 children, basically. The name for a child, the name for Mädchen, which is a young child in German, is das Mädchen. And das signifies neutrality of gender. Okay, because das Mädchen cannot be wed, cannot be having intercourse, and so on and so forth. So basically, when you talk about what people were being pressured to do, supposedly in the name of Muhammad, which has nothing to do with what Muhammad actually said, was to rape 4 women or 4 children. Okay, at the time where gender doesn't even evolve. There's genitalia, but gender doesn't even evolve. And of course, and usually what happens in this society, polygamy is society by force. Okay, I'm not talking about kinky societies, and no, is that let's say the first woman you are being pressured to marry because everybody's waiting for you to be wed, and then you have to have a second woman because it shows off your status that you're a good man, you are able to support 4 women, and so usually the second one you actually fall in love with, and then the relations between these 2 women. Okay, and how both the men and the women suffer in this society. So this is what feminism showed. Okay, but then comes the transgender woman and threatens the sanctity of the feminist, because she's like, oh well, cisgender women can be criminal too. Okay, and there we are very likely to have violence by women, because by cisgender women. Why? Because cisgender, for those who are not not major of gender studies, is basically when the genitalia and the gender are coinciding to be the same. So like a penis and a man and a vagina and a woman. So it's like I'm a woman, I have a vagina, it's cisgender. I'm a man and a woman and I have, let's say, penis or vagina, it is already considered on the transgender spectrum. If you're gender fluid, then that's another thing. So, um, so Aries brings, let's say, the transgender woman, and then people say, well, she has or had a penis, therefore she's like a man, therefore she's harming us. But then there are cisgender women who commit violent crimes. Okay, the issue of whether you are repressed or not repressed is how you stand within the power equation. Okay, on a personal note, during the Me Too era, Eris and Uranus squared Pluto. Not too far from my Mercury. So what happened? I wrote a satire. Okay, I was being this hyoka or townsful or whatnot, and then after a while, I was able to do so because of the power of social media that I wasn't even aware. Because on Facebook, you don't see how exposed were your posts. You only see engagement. And of course, nobody will engage with that type of content, so do not expose themselves. And apparently it had way more power than I had predicted that I had. Okay, so of course, if somebody disempowers me by their action, I feel disempowered. And what does a person who is disempowered do? Well, say if anyway what I say doesn't matter and I feel the need to speak, so I'll speak. What not? Okay, and you have no idea how impactful your words are. And so after a couple of years, I asked myself, okay, now that I understand that I did have way more power in the situation that I was predicted to have at the time, now I want to understand what is the right thing, or should I repent anything that I done? And eventually the only thing that came up was Monica Lewinsky, because in one of my setters, I said to the person who was basically harassing me, and that was, I'm not your Monica Lewinsky, you're not my Bill Clinton. And that was something that I needed to repent, because Monica Lewinsky is Me Too veteran, okay, which I did repent with Venus conjuncted Pluto in Capricorn. And so that is the turning over of power, and you becoming in a certain position where you may feel the outcast, but now the spotlight is on you, and now you have to be powerful. Now you have to be powerful without abusing power. Okay, so you kind of receive a different note. Aries Pluto can also do that. And so the identity here of gender and of sex, okay, so gender, sex relation, the identity of being a victim of corruption and being corrupt, okay, because if you're a victim of corruption, what happens? If you're a victim of corruption, basically it means that you can experience financial violence, violence from resources. Then what a person who is being marginalized in this way does but crime. Okay, if you cannot pay for your food, then you have to eat, right? And so this decomposing of the outcast, and Pluto Aries is the decomposing of the outcasts themselves. And those things are kind of meant to venture into a more radically accepting society that builds structures that are actually good for our humanity. Okay, so with all due respect to feminism, if you're a cisgender woman who thinks that a transgender woman threatens you because she has a penis, and I understand the people thinking, okay, in a patriarchal world, you see, it doesn't make sense. I tried. It doesn't make sense. It's not rational belief. But it exposes our irrationality. It exposes our projections, our fears that are so much. And then a person says, okay, I have been fighting. The marking for my revolution was, demote the penis, where in fact, that's what I love to say, is your dick is not sexist. Okay? And you can actually see that people who are attuned to their bodies and have a penis will sometimes notice that they cannot get erect, so they get very erect, and then they come to actually implement and they don't get erect, and it's not something because of them, but they speak with the partner, and let's say the partner had a vagina, and the other partner suddenly, like, they were having a flashback, they were having something, and they were not able to have sex, and so the penis declined. That being said, an erect penis does not necessarily mean that everybody's ready for an encounter, including the person who has the penis. So neither does a wet vagina. So that is another point where even feminists have to kind of think like, wait, what bothered me in essence? What bothered me? Okay, a situation where there was not willing consent, a situation where I couldn't say no. And so how can I say yes to you if I cannot say no to you? Okay, and vice versa. It's like I also have to make sure that you are able to say no to me. Okay, if I'm dependent on you with my resources, then I cannot say yes to you because I cannot say no to you because I'm dependent on you. And so for us to have anything of willing consent, I need to have my resources. It's both taking responsibility and tending to things, and for the resources to be available, for it to not be so difficult that you have to be heroic to just make a life while making a living. And similarly from the penis version of that. Eris reminds us of the essence in quite a mercurial way here by decomposing our binary categories. Okay, and again, this is the way I see her. And that is a part of the journey that I've talked about Mars, but here now it's Venus time. Venus has to take a step back and to get to the essence of things. And so we have Ketu in Venus sign, whichever house it plays for you. Okay, we have Ketu in Venus sign. And we have, even before Ketu reaches Venus, we already have a decomposition where we need to let go of our worldview of the Venusian so that we can reintegrate a completely new view. So yes, there's chaos and mayhem regarding women. And I want to tell you about something. Okay, Venus, I don't know if she's in the shade or not. She's in Leo, 2 degrees Leo. But the thing is, I was going to visit my parents. I was driving public transportation. And I sat the seat behind the driver. Suddenly, I see someone, like the knuckles of his hand touching my hip. And before I take him down, I just looked, I moved aside, and I was angry at myself for moving aside and not for pushing him away, like not setting the boundary. But he moved his hand, and he was an old man with the kippah, which is like religious, of Nachman moments in silver, very nice. And I just concluded that it was an old person who's about to go in this station, and he just tries to hold to both of the seat handles so that he can stand. So it was difficult maybe to stand. And so I came out at the next station, which I needed to go at, and suddenly I hear the woman who was sitting right to my side. She told this man, she said, "Are you not going down this station? Are you not going down this station?" Then she said, "Driver, driver," and then she got out of the vehicle. Now I looked at her. She had like a health institution something, and then behind the shirt was written security. So it was like, maybe she's security, I don't know for where. And this whole situation was weird. And then she came down and I said, "Lady, are you okay?" and so on. And she began to cry. And she told me that this person, as she went to the bus, she's a security woman, okay? As she went to the bus, this old man sat behind her. Then he comes to sit next to her, and she said, "I need to pay," but he comes to sit next to her. So she got up and she stood. Okay, she stood in a place where you could stand. Then he comes and he stands right next to her. Then she got really scared and she saw the seat in front of me, or to the other side of me, which is the closest seat to the driver. Then she sat there. And then the guy comes. She said, "Okay, probably he's going to go in this station." And he didn't come down at the station that I was going down. So that was when he realized, okay, he was following her within the bus, and she saw him a couple of times in the place where she lives. And I tell her, say, "Oh my God, too bad I didn't know, because I would tell the driver to drive to the next police station, which is what he's supposed to do by law." And she told me, "Listen, I just came back. I just came back from a it's kind of a meeting where we were instructed on what to do in emergencies. Like, I'm a security person, I'm supposed to know, like, what to do. Okay, and then of course, even this woman who's a security person, this is her daytime job, she froze, and then she had to call a family member, um, so that when she arrives to home, that person would not stalk her. Okay, and if you think about the situation, this happening to a security woman, okay, a security woman that just came back from knowing what to do part. Okay, she's not a person who doesn't know what to do. The older person who's religious person, he just looked like a person who can't hold himself, and so he has to, who cannot stand. Maybe it's difficult for him to stand, so he doesn't look like a person who is offender in any way. And yet he was stalking her as this security woman. Think about how many things you have. A lady who is a security, she was not with the gun, but even if she had, it's not, there are a lot of limitations around shooting. And it's kind of like so many categories broke, okay, so from the old thinking. Well, we have this religious man who looks like a person who can barely stand, who is actually an offender and actually a stalker. We have this woman from security, and we have this woman who is unarmed, just telling this security woman, "Oh my God, if I knew, then I would tell the driver to drive to the police station." So there are so many humorous things, but also tragic, and so many categories here that are being played with and broken. And that's partially mercurial, but it's also partially that role of Eris. That role of Eris here. Okay? That notion that essentially there is no face, no religion, no gender, and no sex to who is a predator and who is not a predator. Okay? At the cathartic stage of it, it also shows you how ridiculous being a predator or war is. And it's not for nothing that we are tackling this before Neptune comes to Eris. And before Pluto goes for good into the power of the people. So this is just one incident. So at this time, whatever happens points to the fact that the old categories in which we used to think of the world as gender, as penis and vagina, as finances and value, as beauty and drive, as essence and form, all of that is being decomposed by the merit of the eclipses, and kind of Venus makes place for Eris. She takes a step back from the stage now, so that Eris can come and do what she came here to do. To some degree, Eris is here to remind us that feminism and humanism are one. It was never about gender. It was about both power inequity and about radical acceptance of ourselves as people and of people for being people. And of many things that I don't know yet, because the course of time has not come to show, come into full fruition. So everything I will say will be predictive. And in this time, I think that honoring Eris, meeting Eris halfway, turning to Eris can help or assist or facilitate this transition. And by the way, at the same time, Sedna is going from being Venus ruled to being Mercury ruled. Okay, Sedna is another story, even a grander story. Okay, she moves even more slowly than Eris. So Eris wants to get to the essence, and on the way decompose things, very much resembling of the Pluto archetype. And if we demote her just by saying I am, she can demote others. Here, if you think about the discovery of Eris and Pluto, Pluto, instead of saying Eris is a planet, we demoted Pluto from being a planet, which is silly. Eris is a bit bigger than Pluto, so we said, okay, if Eris is not a planet, and we can't possibly say that Eris is a planet, okay? It's kind of like, well, we can't possibly say that a woman with a penis is a woman. And so we emasculate men. It doesn't make sense. Which is literally what happened. And so from Eris' point of view, we can assume that she doesn't even see it that way. First of all, she doesn't know what a planet is. And let's say if you're the bigger guy and you say, okay, you are not a planet because you're not big enough to be a planet, then you say, okay, I'm not a planet, I'm not big enough to be a planet. So this exoplanet next to me, and mid-sentence she's being, because you said, what? This is Pluto. Oh, but he's a bit more like little than I am. He's planet, but he's a bit more like, okay, if he's planet, I'm planet, it's no problem. You said I'm not planet, okay, then because I'm not big enough, then he's a bit smaller than I am. And so she demotes Pluto, not by merit of desiring to demote Pluto, but by just observing. You said that I'm not big enough to be a planet, and then there is this planet is a bit smaller than me, so probably he's also not planet. And then the world turns to her, how dare you say that? And she looks at them like bewildered and shocked. And then she is trying to show them in all kinds of ways of why she believes, like why is she having this misunderstanding, which of course create mundane events that are composing the fabric, decomposing the fabric of reality in relation to identity and Eris, and in relation to the fabric of time itself, which is Saturn ruled Pluto. And being in a sign where is Mars ruled, then it can be innovation, it can also be war, when unfortunately war and innovation, necessity is the mother of innovation. So if you whatever will happen, whatever events will happen, all of us are in for a refreshing point of view regarding Venus and Mars things. Where to turn to? Turn to Eris, okay? Because this is the time where we get to know Eris better. We have Rahu eclipse we had on April 20 or 30. We had eclipse on Rahu with Eris being involved, okay? So what in our categories that we have reassembled from antiquity in order to defend ourselves, basically, are no longer serving. Because that is what is breaking apart now. Okay? If you think about the time of Hitler, and that was also Eris Pluto related. So Hitler's story, okay, he had a Jewish doctor that was helping his mom. Like he did not come from a place was necessarily reasoning to hate Jews. But then whenever he went, he couldn't get away, and he liked to paint. Which is, funnily enough, it is a person that was offender towards me that showed us literally the pictures that Hitler painted, and he read from Mein Kampf. So in a way, so to educate. So it is very funny also the way in which I came to learn this, and the pictures that Hitler painted. From the vantage point of that doctor, he said, well, there were nothing new about them. Everybody was doing impressionism, everybody was doing like cool stuff, and then he was just painting nature at ease. So from his point of view, it's like, yeah, he was not that much of a talented artist to begin with, so he didn't then complain that he wasn't accepted into the academy. I see it in a completely new way. He brought something into the fabric of time that was of all times, which is literally what Hitler came and did later with his occultism and with his, unfortunately, endeavors, political endeavors. But the thing is, he was just painting nature at ease. That was what he was painting. And he did not get income. What not getting into academia basically means he did not get income that could support his art. What was his art at the time is painting a picture of nature, so natural scenery. All the pictures, we would look at nature and then we would paint the grass, paint the leaf, nothing interfering in nature. And those was here his picture, and it had time, like when you think about it, it's timeless value to art. And what he was literally told by his entire society in ways of income, in ways of can you make money to allocate your resources and time to paint these pictures of nature that are not interesting to the public because they're not impressed, they're not messing up with the fabric of reality, which was the art at the time, in a way that creates interest, that triggers something. Okay, so he was not considered a talented artist at this time. So the entire society was disowning him from the ability to create with ease and make a life while making a living as an artist. And so he adapted. And he did not do it in academia. But eventually, what did he take? He took the swastika, that is an ancient symbol of peace and healing and well-being, and blah, 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 inverted it, made it in black and white and red, okay? Gave the imagery of eagle. The ancient, so the symbolism of an eagle, and so he gave it new meaning. Okay, so he did what he was asked for, but he did it outside of academia. He basically, unfortunately, Hitler painted a picture of what surrealism would look like in reality. And so it was this is very unfortunate and tragic because it was the person who was painting nature and seemed like he had no value to add to the fabric of his time, but to just bring something that is old and put it in the new. And it was this person who could easily have been left at painting natural scenery and making money from it, that ended up doing the most surrealistic art, the play of reality and non-reality into being. Okay, that's an Eris Pluto tale, and he took the place of battle, okay, and came up as basically Mein Kampf in essence. I didn't read the whole book. There's also a problem of availability of reading the book, which you can understand like why, but you could have also arguments in favor and against it. And basically Mein Kampf, or My War, is in essence an understanding of the nature of reality, of people, individuals, as fighting life on the sword. So if you look at nature and all you see is war, then you want to be strong, and so you eliminate, you get strong by elimination. And that created, unfortunately, a very unhealthy species or race, because what happens to the immune system without biodiversity? It becomes weak. It doesn't know to identify what is good, what is bad, what is enemy, what is not enemy. What happened to people when they are so clean that whenever they interact with anything that is not of that cleanliness, they begin to be seriously ill. Okay, we call these people with failed immune system. Okay, that is what racism does. This is what interracial marriages do to the immune system eventually. And so in essence, was it about a stronger race? Was it about resilience? Was it about, or artistically, was it about interfering with the fabric of reality so much so that the person who doesn't do that, we consider them not having a voice or not having anything interesting to say, although they can be very talented at painting what they see. Hitler was talented at reflecting in his imageries what he sees. We didn't give him the money to do so on canvas, so he did it politically. Okay? And this is not about advocating for Hitler, but understanding that what allowed for this rise to be is the environment, in as much as the person. Hitler was never that power. One person is never, hardly ever that powerful by the merit of themselves that they can do so much damage. It's the people that give that power to the person. And he was given this power by ostracizing him. Okay? So we want to both be able to understand that. And here I would turn to Eris and turn to Pluto for an understanding. So when we can't go to the Mars and we can't go to the Venus, we are here with Eris that is in Mars sign, to try and understand how do we meet Eris halfway? How do we meet Eris in favor of humanity on life on Earth? So this was my talk. We are in a Jupiter day, Mercury hour. So you see, no Venus, no Mars, and I'm doing this in honoring of Eris. So Jupiter and Mercury are Venus ruled, and we're doing this on a Jupiter day, Mercury hour, which probably has changed already, but I hope you have enjoyed this talk. I know that this is a talk that if you listen to it, if you manage to listen to it the whole way through, then you probably were agitated, triggered, upset, or idealizing more than once. And so, yes, that is definitely the type of conversation that tests the patience of everyone involved, and yet we need to have it. And we need to have it in order to give place for beauty and essence in the world, and basically for the themes to go about in a way that is actually benefic to humanity, not just benefic to humanity on the long term, because after the two world wars, okay, it's just generally, it's like we don't necessarily need the tragedy in order to grow. So that is the spirit of this episode, and this disclaimer for this one. So in honoring of Eris, I will say to you goodbye for now, and you can subscribe to my channel if you like this type of content. Definitely subscribe to my channel, click the notification if you are waiting for my Eris episode that I have coming up, a very fascinating interview that I'm looking forward. I'm not sure when will it air, because we are recording on a waning moon, and I'd like to have a growing moon for that, for the airing. So yeah, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.